Welcome to the Dr. Najmaldin webinar series hosted by the Washington Kurdish Institute. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sirwan Najmaldin Karim, president of the Institute. I'd like to start by thanking all of our distinguished speakers and viewers for joining us this morning, or afternoon or evening, depending where you are. Our discussion today will focus on Turkey's war against the Kurds, the United States Kurdish policy or lack thereof, and US-Turkish relations. Today we're going to hear from Ambassador Peter Galbraith, Dr. Henri Barkey, Ms. Nilüfer Koç, Mr. Hiwa Osman, and if Ms. Zainab Sorab is able to join us, I know she has internet difficulties, we'll hear from her as well. When our institute was founded 25 years ago, the term Turkish-occupied Kurdistan would have referred to northern Kurdistan. However, today, Turkey is occupying not only northern Kurdistan, but also parts of western Kurdistan or Rojava and Syria, and areas in southern Kurdistan and the Kurdistan region of Iraq. Within Turkey's own borders, President Erdogan and his government continue oppressing Kurds through arrest, torture, and imprisonment of thousands, including political opponents. In western Kurdistan or Rojava in Syria, the local population has been subject to forced displacement, detention, extortion, kidnapping, and murder. Since the 2018 Turkish occupation of Afrin, the Kurdish population has decreased from over 95% to less than 25%, with hundreds of thousands of Turkmen and Arab settlers being brought to the area to occupy Kurdish homes. In southern Kurdistan, in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, civilians have been killed by Turkish airstrikes, churches have been hit by airstrikes, the inhabitants of dozens of Kurdish and Christian villages have been displaced due to the ongoing bombardment. Erdogan is open with his intentions, and after nearly 2 decades in power, he knows that a lack of response to his threats can be interpreted as a green light. Just days ago, he threatened to clean up the UN-recognized refugee camp in Mahmur. He followed up on this threat with unprovoked airstrikes against the camp, resulting in the loss of innocent lives. Turkey's latest invasion of southern Kurdistan is a threat to the existence of the KRG, which is the only recognized entity the Kurds enjoy after decades of fighting for freedom. All Kurds must be united against these threats in order to protect Kurdistan and its people at all costs. At this critical time, with another large-scale Turkish military campaign in southern Kurdistan underway, we're pleased to welcome our friends from the Kurdish National Congress and other distinguished speakers to discuss the regional and global consequences and policy ramifications of Turkey's war against the Kurds, and also to discuss possible policy approaches for the United States. It looks like Ms. Zainab is still having internet difficulties, so we're going to hear from the translator who's going to read her speech to us. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing from you all.
Thank you. On behalf of the membership of the Kurdistan National Congress, I welcome you and thank you all for attending this event. I would also like to thank the Washington Kurdish Institute for their support in organizing this conference. The founder of this institute, the late Dr. Najmaldin Karim, was a dear friend of ours, a founding member of the Kurdistan National Congress, and a great patriot. And today, with his institute, we will discuss an important matter of a national concern. For years, the Turkish state has targeted the Kurdish people in 3 parts of Kurdistan and occupied Kurdistan through military operations. The attacks and occupation strategy of the Turkish state are now a national concern for all Kurds in all parts of Kurdistan. The Turkish state openly stands against the existence of Kurds in Kurdistan and does not hide its intentions, which are demonstrated through its cultural, political, and military policies. Through its attacks and military operations, the Turkish state aims to forcibly change Kurdistan's demographics and destroy its environment. In northern Kurdistan, the state's political genocide operations continue, with hundreds of Kurdish politicians imprisoned. To this day, the Turkish state has consistently taken an aggressive stance against the cantons of Rojava, West Kurdistan, and the autonomous authorities in Rojava and North and East Syria, and is expanding its occupation of Afrin and of other areas in Rojava. In South Kurdistan, they have established tens of military and intelligence bases and outposts to be used against the interests of our people. I believe Ms. Zainab has joined, so I'm not sure if I should continue or translate.
You can continue. You can continue, and she just could say hello.
Okay. In South Kurdistan, they have established tens of military and intelligence bases and outposts to be used against the interests of our people. On April 24th, 2021, the Turkish state launched an extensive operation in South Kurdistan in the regions of Metina, Zap, and Avashi. These large-scale attacks target the achievements of the Kurds and in particular are aimed at occupying South Kurdistan. The Turkish state's choice of this date, April 24th, for the initiation of operations is no coincidence, as it is the anniversary of the Armenian genocide. This is a clear message, an open threat of genocide. Through international diplomacy as well, the Turkish state has mobilized all of its resources to obtain permission for the annihilation of Kurds. While this war is in violation of international law, no stance has been taken against these attacks at the international level. For that reason, this conference is very meaningful and timely. Once again, we would like to express our appreciation and gratitude for your efforts to address the Turkish state's policies against the Kurdish people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zeynep.
Thank you.
So thank you to Zeynep and Sirwan for your opening remarks, and a special thanks to Eliana for the fantastic translation of what Zeynep has just said. Hello and good morning. My name is Philip Kowalski, and I am joining you from Washington Kurdish Institute in Washington, D.C. And I'm very happy to have you here today for this event. We have, in addition to who you just heard speaking, we have 4 speakers with us. That is Dr. Henry Barkey, Hiba Osman, Nilüfer Koç, and Ambassador Peter Galbraith. I'd like to briefly introduce the 4 of them, and then they have remarks that they would like to tell us. The first up is Dr. Henry J. Barkey, an adjunct senior fellow for Middle East Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations and the Bernard L. and Bertha F. Cohen Chair in International Relations at Lahey University. At CFR, he works on strategic future of the Kurds in the Middle East. Previously, he was a director of the Middle East Center at the Woodrow Wilson Center for International Scholars. Dr. Barkey served as chair of the Department of International Relations at Lahey University for 13 years. He served on the State Department policy planning staff, working on the Eastern Mediterranean, the Middle East, and intelligence-related issues from 1998 to 2000. He was a non-resident senior associate at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace between 2008 and 2011. Dr. Barkey currently also serves as the chair of the academic committee on the board of trustees of the American University in Iraq at Suleimani. He has written extensively on Turkey, the Kurds, and other Middle East issues. Next up, we have Ambassador Peter W. Galbraith, an author, commentator, policy advisor, and former diplomat. From 1993 to 1998, he served as the first UN ambassador to Croatia, where he negotiated and signed the 1995 Erdut Agreement that ended the Croatian War of Independence. From 2000 to 2001, Ambassador Galbraith was the Director for Political, Constitutional, and Electoral Affairs for the UN mission in East Timor and a cabinet minister in East Timor's first transitional government. In 2009, he was an Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, serving in Afghanistan. From 1979 to 1993, he was a staff member for the U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, where he managed the State Department authorization legislation and wrote laws to protect the global environment, prevent nuclear proliferation, and promote human rights. Galbraith has more than 3 decades of on-the-ground experience in Iraqi Kurdistan and Rojava, having documented Iraq's destruction of Kurdish villages and the use of chemical weapons with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in the 1980s. He was in Iraqi Kurdistan during the 1991 uprising and was an advisor to the Iraqi Kurdish leaders during the negotiations on the Iraqi constitution. He is the author of 2 books and numerous articles on Iraq, Syria, and Kurds, including the bestseller, The End of Iraq. He has been a regular visitor to Rojava and recently reuniting young Yazidi women kidnapped by ISIS with their children. Next up, we have Ms. Nilüfer Koç, born in Ardahan, northern Kurdistan, is member of the Executive Council and spokesperson for the Commission on Foreign Relations of the Kurdistan National Congress, the KNK. Ms. Koç came to Germany in 1976 as the child of Kurdish migrant workers and studied biology and political science at the University of Bremen. Her current primary political focus is the improvement of national dialogue amongst political parties and civil society organizations in Kurdistan, and she spent most of the period from 2013 to 2018 in southern Kurdistan and Rojava and East Syria. Parallel to national unity efforts, Ms. Koch is also active in the international arena in raising awareness of the right to self-determination for the Kurdish people and all ethnic and religious components of Kurdistan, and she is interested and engaged in the active and autonomous participation of women in all fields of society and politics. And finally, we have Mr. Hiwa Osman. He is an award-winning Iraqi journalist and commentator and CEO of Mediawan.me, a media and communication service agency in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. He previously served as Iraq country director for the Institute of War and Peace Reporting and media advisor to Iraqi President Javad Talabani from 2005 to 2008. Mr. Osman was also previously a writer and producer with BBC News and is a prominent commentator and analyst on the politics and media of Kurdistan and Iraq. So with that said, I would like to offer Dr. Henry Barkey the first comments, and he will be commenting on U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East and the role of the Kurds. Henry?
Thank you very much. Thank you for the Washington Kurdish Institute for organizing this event. And also, Najmaldin Karim was somebody I knew quite well and miss him a great deal. Look, I'm going to make some very general comments and kind of reserve more specific ones maybe later to the discussion, because since I'm the first to go, it's kind of difficult to be that. I want to leave the others to be much more specific. So let me just talk about U.S. policy towards the Middle East under the Biden administration. It seems that the impression out there is that the United States is trying to wean itself out of the Middle East. It wants to focus on the Pacific. The Middle East has been a source of great deal of unhappiness, if you want, for American administrations. It's been wars and unsuccessful peace efforts. It doesn't look like the United States has gotten a great deal from all the efforts it has put in and into the Middle East. And clearly the rise of China is a far more challenging foreign policy issue for the United States. So with that, we see that at least as far as the Biden administration is concerned, it came into office with maybe the only priority in the Middle East being the famous JCPOA, the nuclear agreement with Iran that the Trump administration had pulled out of, and so the administration is now trying to resuscitate that, and it has put in a lot of effort into that. We don't know if it will provide results yet, but nonetheless, that has been the single most important focus when it comes to the Middle East. And I would argue that despite all these rumors of American disinvolvement in the Middle East, this is something that is probably not very realistic. The Middle East is an area that always sucks you back in. It doesn't leave you alone, and we saw with the Israel-Hamas war 2 weeks ago. But more importantly, I would argue that the Middle East is still a very important part of the world. All you have to do is look at its location. It sits at the crossroads. I mean, if you think of the Middle East as being Turkey to Saudi Arabia, Morocco to Iran, so this is a very large area with lots of internal contradictions, internal problems, and all of these problems have a tendency to export themselves elsewhere. And I'll talk about a few of these in a minute. But you can essentially think of the Middle East as having tentacles all over the world. I mean, even in terms of the human aspect, look at the number of refugees that have come out of the Middle East, look at the size of the diaspora, especially in Europe. These are all political factors that make the Middle East in some ways still a very, very important area. And look, people are also talking about a post-oil world. We're talking about climate change and trying to reduce our carbon footprint and reduce dependence on oil. The fact of the matter is that this transition will take a long time, and oil will still remain an important factor in our economies. So from that point of view, to think that Middle East's oil is no longer an important factor, and a factor, by the way, which consumed a great deal of American resources in terms of keeping the ship lanes open, etc. over the years, that will also be oil will remain as an important factor. So I would argue that the Middle East is still important. The other factor I should mention when it comes to the Middle East is that in the Middle East today, you have a number of actors which I would essentially define as revisionist powers. By revisionist, I mean powers that are intent on changing, to their own benefit, obviously, the structures, the relationships, the equation in the region. These include Iran, Turkey, Russia. I mean, Russia is getting involved has been involved in the Middle East for a long time, but now we see, especially with the war in in Syria, it has a real stake. It has invested heavily in Syria. But moreover, Russia, as part of its superpower status, has this, if you want, from the American perspective, an unnerving tendency to try to undermine whatever it is the United States is doing. But you can also think of China as also a potential revisionist power looking into coming into the region. And maybe that's too early. But the fact of the matter is that we have seen both Iran for a very, very long time and Turkey, especially in the last decade under President Erdogan, the first decade of Erdogan was a little bit different than the second decade, where you have essentially a Turkey that is far more aggressive, far more willing to take risks, far more willing to challenge the status quo. And as we have heard and we've seen, there's now Turkish military involvement in many, many parts of the Middle East. And in some ways, I think Turkey has become a very unpredictable power. Now, when it comes to the administration and whether or not it has a Middle East policy in this context, I mean, I think everybody would say if it has a Middle East policy, we don't know what it is, right? The only thing, as I said earlier, is JCPOA is the only thing we know specifically. But I would argue, and this is, I think Peter, who has more experience, especially on the Senate with then Senator Biden. Let's face it, Senator Biden is someone who knows the Middle East better than probably anybody in his administration. All of them put together, I would say. He's been involved in all parts of the Middle East, including Kurdistan and Iraq, and has very definite ideas. And one thing we have seen about President Biden is that in many, many ways, the person everybody thought would be a middle-of-the-road president is almost a revolutionary one, at least in terms of domestic American foreign policy, domestic American policy. And I suspect that once he starts, once he thinks he has domestic policy under control, he will focus more on foreign policy. And this is a person who spent most of his career in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and therefore has very, very well developed ideas that he has not yet communicated to the American public. So and this is a hunch, I'm not saying it will happen, but my guess is that we will see at some point in his tenure a major foreign policy strategy emerge. And when it comes to at least Kurdistan, and let me say a few comments about this. I mean, clearly, President Biden in his previous, shall we say, years has been very, very involved in Kurdistan, knows the Kurdish region exceedingly well, has at times done things that the Kurds have not liked, but at times has said things that the Kurds have liked very much. I mean, starting with his famous op-ed with Leslie Gelb, I think in 2006, where he said Iraq should be divided into 3 relatively autonomous regions, and of course with the Kurds having their own, being being part of Iraq, but still kind of an extended a federal arrangement. Then, of course, he also did upset the Kurds by trying to get Imam Jalal to give up the presidency for Iyad Alawi. That backfired. But nonetheless, this is also in 2015, I believe he said that one day we will see an independent Kurdistan. We will in our lifetime see an independent Kurdistan. So I think his involvement, whether it's going to provide comfort to today with the Kurdish region, is actually quite deep. We have heard American officials, whether at the White House or the Pentagon, say that the United States has a strategic relationship with Erbil, right? And it is true that at least militarily and intelligence-wise, the Kurdish region is emerging as an important hub for American military and as in intelligence activities. But I suspect that Biden's approach, once it becomes clear, will be far more nuanced and far more developed than anything that the administration at the moment has been saying about this issue. So let me stop here, and then we can come back to, I'll come back to in the comment section. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henry. Next up, we're going to turn to Hiwa Osman, who would like to speak about Turkish military aggression as a destabilizing force in South Kurdistan and Northeast Syria / Rojava. Hiwa?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, good afternoon, morning, everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. It's a very timely topic, I think. As we speak now, the military operations are still ongoing in the northern parts of the Iraqi Kurdistan region. And it is just a continuation of a policy that has been by the Turkish state that has been ongoing for the past, I would say, 30 years. Every spring to summer, we have that episode, and not much effect has been achieved in terms of Turkish national interest, quote unquote, in terms of eliminating the PKK or creating a better situation for the government of Turkey. I have been visiting Rojava quite often over the past few years. And again, in Rojava, in the northeast parts of Syria, where the Kurds have been, the Kurds and other communities in the region have been trying to establish some form of administration with the help of the United States in terms of fighting ISIS. They too have the same concerns about the Turkish ongoing threat of attacking, and we saw what happened 2 years ago with Serikani and with Afrin before that. One thing that is pretty much unnoticed that I felt very strong in Rojava was that visiting the camps where the ISIS fighters or the ISIS families are in, like the Al-Hol camp, or some of the prisons where they have the ISIS captives, one thing that is keeping their morale high, keeping them hopeful about the future, keeping them determined to continue their terror, is the ongoing threats that Erdogan makes to invade Rojava and to end the presence of that administration in Rojava. Every journalist who speaks to them, after a while, the second or the third sentence, a journalist or a human rights activist or whoever interviews these prisoners, they would tell you one day we will be free because Erdogan is going to invade and to free us all. We saw initial signs of this 2 years ago when there was an attack on Serikani, when he took more area in the Serikani area. And a lot of we could see it from their social media, from the pro-ISIS websites and social medias, that they were very happy. They were very optimistic about their future because Erdogan will be coming and releasing them. This is one. The other issue with Rojava is that this ongoing, despite repeated attempts from the SDF, from the Rojava administration, to have some form of normal relationship with the state of Turkey, and they have asked various mediators through some back-channel diplomacy to create any kind of contact or dialogue with the northern neighbor. It was all faced with refusal, and the main approach from Ankara that everyone heard is that this entity has to end in a military operation, or it has to basically cease to exist. In the area that Erdogan takes, he basically replaces the Kurdish administration or the SDF, pro-SDF administration in these areas with militias that are very similar to ISIS. In fact, most of those members used to be from Nusra or from ISIS, and now they are part of the Free Syrian Army, Al-Jaysh al-Suri al-Hur. And they are instituting, if you go to Serikani, for example, or Afrin, you will see a governance structures, or the rule, the authority there is exactly like Mosul under ISIS. So this is one of the key things that is posing a threat to everyone in the region and to the international community that has been fighting ISIS for all these years. One repeated remark from Erdogan that we hear always is that he does not want to see an entity in North Syria that is similar to that of northern Iraq. So in a way, despite all of what the Kurdish parties say about good relations or neighborly relations with Turkey, Erdogan at the end of the day, he sees the entity in Iraqi Kurdistan as a threat, as a national security threat against him. And with his repeated operations in these areas, the bordering areas, every time he made an advance, he stayed in these areas. He did not back to the lines or to the front lines that existed before conducting that operation. Now a new development or a new tactic that he's been using in the area of Iraqi Kurdistan under the pretext of fighting the PKK is committing an ecocide. Now all the areas that are under his control, under the control of the Turkish army, the trees are being cut and they are being transferred to Turkey to sell in the market there. So the images yesterday, I think there was a report that in Barwari Bala area, they cut 10,000 apple trees and 4,000 pear trees just in one day. And the campaign is ongoing. It is very clear that the end game, or his aim at the end, is to completely depopulate these areas from any human habitat and create a situation that is very similar to what the Saddam regime had during the Anfal campaigns in the 80s in Iraqi Kurdistan. This is on one side. On the other side, what we are seeing also is that the continued military campaign in Iraqi Kurdistan, the Turkish state is trying to involve the Kurdish parties or get them into conflict with each other. A few days ago, the 5 members of the Peshmerga forces were killed in an incident. It is still not very clear, but all the initial witness accounts and everything else are telling us that the attack happened through either a drone or a plane, a fighter jet, because it wasn't the way the vehicle was attacked. It wasn't horizontal, it was from above. That created a big tension between the KDP and the PKK. The PKK themselves categorically denied, and they said this has nothing to do with us. They offered their condolences to the families of the people who were killed, and they said we are open to any investigation. The general feel amongst the people of Kurdistan is that Turkey is here to destabilize Iraqi Kurdistan on one hand, and to send a message to the Kurdish public in general that they can do whatever they want. The campaign started one day after President Biden spoke about Armenian genocide in his statement, and the analysis here in Kurdistan is that after the phone call they had, he seems to have the green light of the United States to conduct this operation in return for being silent or not making loud noises about President Biden's acknowledgement of the Armenian genocide that happened on the 24th of May. And the situation remains to be very volatile now in Iraqi Kurdistan. People in general realize that PKK is not the target. Fixing the PKK issue doesn't happen in the mountains of Kandil or Matin or Gara or these areas. It happens in Ankara through peace process. The PKK itself expressed their readiness to have a peaceful dialogue. They have given up on any separatist aspirations long ago, but the Turkish state or the Turkish government remains to adamant about the position that the existing group or the current group has to end, and fixing the Kurdish problem in Turkey only has one way to be fixed, and this is through military attack. A few days ago, they also attacked the Mahmur camp, and this was a clear shock to everybody in the region. He demonstrated to everyone that he can do whatever he wants in face of the silence of the international community. In fact, there are signs that the two major international allies that are involved in Iraqi Kurdistan are backing President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in this campaign. Immediately after the attack on the 5 Peshmergas, the killing of the 5 Peshmergas in the conflict zone, the British and American consulates were very quick to say that the PKK has done this, and they, before even waiting for the PKK after them, they condemned the attack, and they immediately said that it was the PKK. Even within the KDP, some of them have said it is the PKK, but others are now giving more balanced or more diplomatic statements about the issue that happened, because the PKK is saying that we did not do it, and they welcome any investigation into the incident. So the way we are seeing the situation in Iraqi Kurdistan is that Erdogan will continue. He will probably, the PKK is not his end game. His end game is to finish the presence of the Iraqi Kurdistan region, or create a situation whereby it can be annexed to Turkey. This is what the public here are saying. I think I'll stop at that, and I hope I can answer some questions if there are any in the question and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Iwa. And regarding questions, I see a few of you have already asked them in the Q&A. Feel free to type them out. We'll get to them after everybody speaks. You're also free to raise your hand and to ask the question yourself on air. So whichever is more comfortable for you. Next up, we're going to go to Nilüfer Koç, and she would like to speak about the geostrategic importance of Turkey and Kurdistan and the new Kurdish dynamic. Nilüfer.
Thank you, Philip, for the introduction, and thank you, Kek Silvan and members of the Washington Kurdish Institute for organizing such important event. First of all, I would like to commemorate Dr. Najmaldin Karim. I worked several years with him, and particularly when I was in Iraqi Kurdistan, he helped me to implement some of my projects in Kirkuk, around Kirkuk and other places in South Kurdistan. So he is a source of inspiration for us. He was a real patriot. He was not just caring for South Kurdistan, but also East Kurdistan, North, and also Rojava. So that's why it's for me honor to speak at a webinar, which is done by the name of Dr. Najmaldin Karim. Thank you. To make it briefly, I think after the Gulf War, two main changes happened in Middle East. Of course, many of the states have become in process of collapsing. We see this today, the peak of collapse in Libya and Yemen, in other places in North Africa, and also in Middle East, particularly after the Arabic Spring. The process of collapsing of the states and the demands of the people for more civil liberties is continuing. So this is the picture of the whole region. And from my perspective, from my Kurdish perspective, I would say there are two main actors in the Middle Eastern region. The one is representing solution and alternative, these are the Kurds. And the one who are causing trouble, chaos, problems is one Iran and Turkey now. So particularly after the liberation of southern Kurdistan, after the fall of Saddam, the first part of Kurdistan, which was under Arabic occupation, of Saddam's occupation, was liberated. And then the second part of Kurdistan was somehow liberated after the crisis of the Syrian regime in 2011. So we have liberated two parts of Kurdistan, which were given to the Arabs after the First World War, has experienced a change. So Kurds are gaining autonomous self-administration, whether the one is recognized internationally, like the one in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. And now the turn of the second part of Kurdistan, it's Rojava and North and East Syria. So this is a change in the region. And the other change is since the collapse of Iraq and Syrian regime, Turkey was seeing this as opportunity to expand Turkish interests in the region. So since 2012, Erdogan is publicly saying he wants to get back the former territories of Ottoman Empire. So his ambition is clear, and he's saying this often and publicly. He wants to get back the territories of Ottoman Empire, which the British and French has stolen from him after the Treaty of Lausanne from 1923. So, and how to do this is firstly to preventing the gains of the Kurds, because the Kurds also try to benefit from the political vacuum in Middle East, and Turkey also. But the Kurds are producing solutions, saying, well, we are not interested to redraw new borders in the region, so we can imagine to live in the current existing borders in form of autonomies, together with all other components in Rojava or in Iraqi Kurdistan. This is the Kurdish side, which has changed in the picture of Middle East. And Turkey was trying to, one side, to prevent the Kurdish experiences of implementing democratic autonomies. On the other hand, trying to occupy firstly the weak parts of northern Iraq, which is South Kurdistan, northern part of Syria, which is Rojava. So, but Turkey was not prepared for a Kurdish resistance, organized resistance. So Turkey was backing many of the jihadist groups, as we have seen in 2014 in Rojava, and now in Mahmud and Shengal, Sinjar area of the Yazidis, and some other places in Iraq. And currently in the war, which started on the 23rd of April, Turkey brought several hundreds of jihadists from Afrin, from occupied Kurdish areas in North Syria, and they are now also fighting against the guerrillas of the PKK in the region of Metin Azab and Awashin. I would say clearly the picture is Turkey is the one who is causing problems, destabilization of the region, and Kurds are offering places like oasis in the desert in areas. So Kurds, by the implementation of Kurdish models of solutions, like we see in Iraqi Kurdistan, in Rojava Kurdistan, we took over two main arguments which Turkey used in international diplomacy. The one was separatism. So no one can accuse the Kurds that they're separatists, they are going to change the borders. Instead, it's Turkey who want to go change the borders of the region. Secondly, the Kurds were accused, particularly the PKK was accused to be a terrorist organization, but we have seen that it was the PKK who defeated the ISIS in 2014 and liberated many places, helped the Peshmergas in Iraqi Kurdistan and also in North and East Syria to liberate the areas from the Islamic Caliphate. So then the people in the world were questioning when the ISIS is terrorist and PKK is defeating the ISIS. Defeating ISIS had mean somehow protecting the whole world from a threat. ISIS was a global threat, and it was broken in Kurdistan through this resistance. We lost 12,000 fighters just in Rojava against the ISIS, and so by these, of course, with the help of the international coalition led by the US and other forces of the international coalition. So now the problem now is one side, however, the US and also other members of the NATO are upset with the Turkish policy. Turkish policy is challenging and provoking also other member states, since there's a strategy of expansionism of Erdogan's pan-Islamism and pan-Turkism. We have seen this at least in Turkey's involvement in Mediterranean Sea, in the Azerbaijan-Armenian conflict. So Turkey is also clearly violating the norms and rules of the international institutions, the UN and NATO. But the reason is why they keep still silent. However, they see Turkey is violating systematically all the rules. Turkey don't look at any of the norms of international law. And this is because Turkey is aware, particularly the current regime led by Erdogan, is aware that for the interests of the NATO in Middle East, Turkey is needed. Particularly Turkish geostrategic location is needed. As Dr. Barkey was stressing, there's a problem of Iran, there's expansion of Russia in the region, and also somehow involvement of China in the region. It's a kind of global war. So also happening, and Turkey is playing a key role with this geostrategic location. Turkey learned this since the time of the founding of Soviet Union until the Cold War. Turkey was playing double game between NATO and Warsaw Pact. So Turkey, because of its location, of strategic location, but now Turkey wants to benefit from this position for its expansion. And this means expansionism of Turkey is concretely focused on two parts of Kurdistan, North East Syria and Rojava and South Kurdistan currently. So, and I think Turkey wouldn't continue as such if the role or the involvement of the third parties in this war, mainly the US, which is the leading power in the NATO, would prevent Turkey by by putting sanctions on Turkey. There are many possibilities to stop Turkish aggression in the region, but it seems that the interest of expansion of NATO in the Middle East is more important than the life of the Kurdish people and other people in the region. So this is what I see now in the picture when I look on the Turkish goal for the new war, which was starting in the 23rd of April. And I don't believe this is just a military clash between the PKK and Turkey. It's clear Erdogan wants to further his military presence in South Kurdistan. And when he was threatening the refugee camp of Mahmud on the 1st of June in publicly, he was giving the message he wants to go to Kirkuk, because Mahmud is very close to Kirkuk. So by saying this, firstly, he is now parallelly, he is busy with getting back the former Ottoman province of Mosul in the area where Turkey is now acting militarily in South Kurdistan. And parallelly to this, he wants to open new front of war against the Kurds in South Kurdistan by saying, I will clean up the refugee camp of Mahmur, means he's showing the direction to Kirkuk. So that's why we speak about the Turkish move, a Turkish attempt of occupying a part of Kurdistan, so that he will prevent the political power of the Kurds, which really is now somehow on the way to be recognized internationally. Because wherever you go in Middle East, even when it's the turn of conflict with Iran, the Kurds will become important, since Iran has also a Kurdish problem, and since the Kurds in Iran also asking for more liberties and democratic rights. So I think this awareness, national unity awareness amongst our people in 4 parts of Kurdistan, and the awareness in Kurdish politics that the vacuum in Middle East is offering us opportunity to solve one of our main problems, the problem of not being recognized legally and politically internationally. So we say this is the right time, since most of the occupying states over Kurdistan, Turkey, Iran, Iraq, Syria, are weak states. We have the opportunity to force these states for democratic transition. So we are trying this through Turkey, and you see the result is the arrestment of thousands of HDP members, the co-chairs like Selahattin Demirtas, Figen Yüksekdağ, the occupation of Kurdish municipalities in Turkey. You see the Turkification policy in the Turkish occupied area of Rojava, the war of drones attacking Kurdish politicians, and all the other components were supportive for the Kurds, like the Arabic tribal leaders in Syria. And we see the current war in southern, the war of occupation, and we see also that Turkey tried to provocate also Iran against the Kurds. All these, I think in near future, all the third parties in this war, whether it's the United States or other members of the NATO, they have to decide. I think the Kurds will continue and not give up the liberties they gained, because we sacrificed thousands of Peshmergas and guerrilla fighters in this war. Just in Rojava, we lost 12,000 of our heroic men and women. We enjoyed somehow the taste of freedom, and we experienced that freedom can happen even in the structures, autonomous structures. There's no need to create a Kurdish nation state currently. So whenever it is a decision have to be made by the Kurds, but the Kurdish political atmosphere is speaking about solution of the Kurdish problem in the current existing borders. So, and I think by saying this, we also took the argument of separatism from international politics. And I think now it's important, currently it's very important, the war now in Zab, Avash, in Metina is a war which will decide the consequences of this war will not affect just South Kurdistan, Rojava, but also the whole region, because the Kurdish problem is not just a national problem, it's a problem for the Arabic states, for Iran, and for other states in the Middle Eastern region. So it's a regional problem, and by saying it's an international problem, a global problem. What we say is, from national perspective, we are ready to make compromises according to our rights in the UN declarations and norms. We have the right to self-determination, and that can be implemented in the current existing borders. The only problem is we are clear, and Turkey is clear. So we say we want to exist and be recognized as Kurds, and Turkey says no. The only option for you is genocide. And now is the turn of the third parties, what they want. So both sides are clear. We say we want to exist and be recognized as a nation in the Middle East, a nation of 50 million people. We have the right to speak in our language, right in education in mother tongue, and these all are in Turkey forbidden. And we are also oppressed in Iran. So in Syria and Iraqi Kurdistan, there are changes, and this gave hope. And I think the only stabilized areas in Middle East are 2 parts of Kurdistan, Bashur, Iraqi Kurdistan part of in Iraq and Rojava. And I think I don't see from the international perspective why it's a problem to recognize the contribution of the Kurds for stabilization of the region, whether it was defeating the Islamic State and other affiliated groups of Al-Qaeda, or that we are ready to live with other ethnic groups who are living with us for centuries in whether it's Kirkuk or in Kamishlo, as we are not going to make any demographic changes in our region in Kurdistan. And so I would say, make it very short, I think the Turkey can't continue to benefit from its geostrategic location, since Turkey became a problem not just to us, but also challenging many of the states who are allies to Turkey, like the US. And I hope in the next summit of the NATO, which will be happening here in Brussels on the 14th of June, that Erdogan would not get any compromises against the Kurds when he's meeting President Biden and other leaders of the NATO member states. So again, thank you so much for having me in this event, and I will now wait for questions. Thank you.
Niloufer, thank you so much. We really appreciate that. Last but certainly not least, we have Ambassador Galbraith. He's going to be discussing whether or not the Biden administration has the Kurdish policy. Ambassador?
Thank you. One of the points of speaking last is everything has said, but not everybody has said it yet. But I'd like to begin, as everybody else has, by thanking the Washington Kurdish Institute, and particularly remembering my dear friend, Najmaldin Karim. In your introduction, Philip, you cited like more than 3 decades of involvement in Kurdistan, particularly Iraqi Kurdistan. And that is because of Najmaldin Karim, who sought me out in 1987 after I'd done a report for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that had mentioned the destroyed villages. And he introduced me to this issue and became a friend for literally half my life. And I'm happy that in the dynastic traditions of Kurdistan, that his sons are continuing this effort, and that's really terrific. Such a talented and wonderful person who has such a talented and wonderful wife and family. So does Biden have I'd like to actually first sort of address the broader questions. You know, when I worked for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, it was a bit like the United Nations. Every country, particularly every small country, and every group would come to see me, and they would say, you know, could the committee pay more attention to us? And I'd say, no, you don't want us to pay attention to you, because we pay attention to places where there are problems, where there are conflicts. And you know, you'd be quite happy off of our radar. And that is absolutely true about any administration's foreign policy. No matter how you talk about some shift to here or there, you can't escape the part of the world where there are problems. And so the Biden administration is not going to be shifting away from the Middle East, nor has any previous administration. Because this part of the world, and I'm speaking to you from Beirut, is where so many of the problems are. Second, I always enjoy the strategists who love to talk about, oh, we're going to take on, you know, we got the strategic competition with China in the 80s. You know, Japan was the rising issue, Russia. Because I think it's sort of full employment for strategic thinkers. But you know, the reality is, people are not overwrought about what China's going to do. Yeah, they can spend a lot of money on the Belt and Road or in Africa, but they're not going to be settling Chinese there, or they're not going to be settling Chinese in Istanbul. They're not going to communize them. They're not going to make them military allies. But there is a shift that the Biden administration is taking, and it's a shift dictated by the nature of the problems we have. It's not a competition with China or Russia. It is the need actually to cooperate with China, Russia, and the European Union to deal with global problems. First and foremost is climate, the pandemic, the global economy, and a problem that is semi-regional, which is nuclear non-proliferation. That's where the priorities are. And really on all of those, yes, there's competition, but for all those big issues, it was going to require cooperation. And frankly, the future of the planet depends on it. So now switching to a Kurdish policy. First, and here I simply will repeat what Henri Barkey has said. Biden has emerged as a revolutionary, radical, major figure on the domestic stage, and I think he enjoys, being potentially being a figure domestically like FDR and LBJ in terms of accomplishments, and personally, I very much hope he succeeds at that. And I do think this will keep his focus. But he is a person who is deeply knowledgeable about the Middle East, cares a lot about it deeply. So he's not going to be absent from it, even as he perhaps has his legacy in the domestic programs that he's undertaking. But beyond that, this is somebody who's deeply cares about the Kurds. And I know because I worked with him on this, certainly at the beginning. In 1988, he was a strong supporter of the Prevention of Genocide Act of 1988 that unanimously passed the Senate to impose stiff sanctions on Iraq for using chemical weapons against the Kurds, and which incidentally was opposed, even cutting aid to Iraq was opposed by the Reagan administration as too extreme a response to Saddam's cutting of gassing of the Kurds. But Biden was there. In August of 1990, days after the invasion of Kuwait, is when he first met the Kurds. I know because I introduced him to Jalal Talabani, Hoshiyar Zabari, Sami Abdul Rahman, and of course, Najmaldin Karim. He's been deeply involved. He held hearings. His three-state solution, I think, was actually 2005, but he held hearings in 2003. And again, I know I testified where this issue was discussed. He went to Kurdistan in 2002, before the invasion, addressed the KRG parliament. And he certainly understands, as do the people in this administration, that sooner or later, Iraqi Kurdistan will be an independent state. This is incidentally something that's basically recognized by Turkey as well. Kenan Evren, before he died, said that, of course there's going to be an independent Kurdistan. The same man who had protested intensely in 1988 when Larry Pope, the office director for Northern Gulf Affairs, had met with Jalal Talabani and Najmaldin Karim, among others. So, there's an understanding that this will happen sooner or later. So, and I have to say, with great respect to Niloufar, I'm sorry, but it's not true that the Kurds are settling for autonomy. The Iraqi Kurds had a referendum in which 97% voted for independence. And the moment the opportunity arises, and Iraq has a wonderful history of creating opportunities, they're going to go for independence. I don't think anybody doubts that. It's true that in Rojava, that's not what they're seeking. They are seeking to continue their rather very interesting social experiment. So what is the policy? Well, obviously the policy toward the Kurds is very much related to the policy toward the countries where they're involved. So in Iraq, The US policy is very much to be supportive of the Kurds, to have a strategic relationship. A great deal of US operations are run out of Iraqi Kurdistan, but also to try to smooth things between Erbil and Baghdad to help solve some of the outstanding issues. In Rojava, it is something that the Trump administration did not accept, it rejected, but that the notion is that the United States and the Biden administration, and Biden is somebody who is a humanitarian at his heart, who has a good moral compass. Yes, the United States has an obligation to the allies in Rojava, a moral obligation, who lost more than 10,000 people in the fight against the Islamic State, a struggle in which I think 5 American service men lost their lives. And of course, not only is that a moral obligation, and again, Biden is somebody for whom that is important, and one shouldn't dismiss moral as something that's not part of how a leader thinks. But it's also strategic. If you don't stand by your allies, the next time you have to fight, you might have to do it yourself. And I suppose the US wouldn't have taken 10,000 casualties if it had fought ISIS, but it would have taken several thousand. So there is an appreciation. So what does that mean in practical terms? Certainly through the Biden administration, there's going to be a US commitment to Rojava. But perhaps it's a time that also Rojava might be looking to negotiate its future within Syria. In terms of, on the one hand, the US is obviously supportive of both Baghdad and Erbil, wanting to solve the problems between the two. With regard to Syria as a whole, US policy, US has a very dim view of the Assad government. But that said, it also has some other concerns beyond, wishing not to have trouble between Syria and the Northeast, the government in Damascus and the Northeast. A second concern is to be supportive of our European allies who don't wish to have any more Syrian refugees coming into Europe, and indeed hoping that some will be able to return home. And that may not mean the US will lift sanctions or participate in reconstruction, but may accept that will go forward and not object, because it makes no sense to continue a war or military action once the outcome is decided, and clearly the war in Syria, the outcome has been decided. With regard to Turkey, Turkey is an ally. I think Erdogan is a bit on the back foot with Biden. He got away with a lot under Donald Trump. He's not getting away with as much, and this has made him more cautious. He also has his own internal problems. I think a lot of people view him as a short timer. Maybe he'll surprise people, but that he is a short timer. I don't subscribe to the view that whatever he may say, that Turkey is realistically thinking of annexing the territories of the former Ottoman Empire, reattaching the Vilayet of Mosul. But it's interesting to Turkey under Erdogan in the first decade of Erdogan, as Audrey referred to it, actually had a very enlightened policy toward the Kurds on language, schooling, local autonomy, so much so that Masoud Barzani went up to Diyarbakir and campaigned with Erdogan, and Erdogan received Masoud Barzani as if he were a head of state. It's shifted in the second decade, particularly following Kobani. But what Turkey, as Erdogan at least saw it initially, was that the good relations with the KRG, which remain, were an extension of Turkish influence, an extension if you will, of a Sunni-defined world as against the Shia-dominated and Iranian-influenced Baghdad. Post-Kobani, there's been some shift, but nonetheless, good relations have remained with Erbil. I think it's good. I don't see, and certainly one goal of a Biden policy is to make sure that to the Kurds that Erdogan does not do anything further reckless in Rojava. That the status quo remain, and I think Erdogan's on pretty much notice that doing something major would be a problem. Finally, the Biden administration is going to be very keen on ISIS not re-emerging, and that, of course, means stability in Rojava. It means stability in the KRG. And I suppose stability in the rest of Iraq, and that means that Turkey does not cause additional problems. I mean, we have to face a simple fact: every foreign terrorist who joined ISIS, got there through Turkey, and when Turkey attacked in October of 2019, the one group of ISIS people who escaped were the detainees in Ain Issa, and where they went was Turkey. So there's going to be Turkey's on notice, and that it's going to have to take a harder line than it was tolerated during the previous administration, that the current administration certainly will expect it to have a harder line on terrorism and on the access that terrorists had to Syria. Let me stop there.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We have questions now, and I would actually like first to start with a question for Henry Barkey. This is from Shirko Kermanji. So the question, Henry, is it's about the elephant in the room, and that is what you expect will happen when Erdogan and Biden will meet on June 14th. Will anything change between the two of them? Henry, I think you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. I don't think there's going to be much change in the Turkish-American relationship as a result of the meeting, in large measure because the issues that divide the two countries at the moment are very, very significant. That is to say that the Turks are going to push very, very hard on the issue of the SDF and the YPG, etc., and on essentially on northern Syria, because they have this rhetoric about these being terrorists, and therefore you have to go after them. And as Peter also explained, I mean, this is not something that Biden is about to concede. But there are also other bigger issues. There are other issues like the S-400s, legal cases in the United States, but in general, and also one thing that was not mentioned is the human rights issue in Turkey. I mean, Turkey has become an authoritarian country under Erdogan, and one thing that distinguishes the Biden administration from its predecessor is a greater emphasis on human rights. We haven't seen maybe much on this. Again, I think this is about to be formulated down the road by Biden. But so to cut a long story short, I think nothing is going to change, but at least Biden will be able to say, I checked the box, I told Erdogan what is important for me, and vice versa. The one very important issue will be whether or not Biden tells Erdogan not to increase his military activities, whether it is in Kurdistan or Eastern Med or Libya, etc. Because that is actually, as I tried to intimate in my previous comments, Turkey as a revisionist policy is trying to change both the real map and the psychological map of the region. And it is one of the big problems down the road that the United States will face, because it's a particularly difficult problem when it is one of your NATO allies that's doing all these things. So I expect that Biden will try to kind of draw a line in the sand on this issue. That's.
Okay, thank you very much, Henry. Next question will be from Vladimir von Wilgenberg. So Vladimir, I'm going to enable your mic right now.
Yeah, so my question is to Ambassador Peter Galbraith. Does he think it's possible that the Kurds will fight each other again? Because recently there have been a lot of accusations between the PKK and also the KDP. The KDP saying that the PKK killed Peshmerga basically, and also today there was another Peshmerga that died. But does he think that there's a possibility of a renewed Kurdish civil war? And maybe Hiwa Osman can also talk about that. What does he think the prospects are for shedding Kurdish blood again? Because it seems like a lot of people actually in Kurdistan are starting to get worried about this situation.
It's a very good question to which I don't have a clear answer. I've often thought that the phrase "the Kurds have no friends but the mountains," there ought to be an amendment to it, and they have many enemies, the worst of whom are the Kurds. Because at various times when they've had great opportunities, intra-Kurdish fighting has derailed them. Of course, there was the horror of the 1990s in Iraqi Kurdistan between the KDP and the PUK. There was also in the 90s fighting between the KDP and the PKK. A lot of the villages along the Turkish border were destroyed on the Iraqi side, not by Saddam. They were too inaccessible. They're destroyed by the PKK. And of course, Kurdistan, the intra-Kurdish, if you will, rivalries, not direct conflict, which Najmaldin Karim did so much to try to heal, compromised the opportunity for independence when it really was an opportunity in the period of 2014 to 2017. That said, I'll be honest, it would be much better if the PKK did not use Iraqi Kurdish territory for attacks on Turkey, because it absolutely invites retaliation. Or even have the presence because for the same reason, but there they are. I suppose that you could see people who are unarmed, but as armed groups who are hostile to Turkey on the territory of Iraqi Kurdistan, yeah, that causes a problem for Iraqi Kurdistan, and it's something that's very much opposed by the KRG. And the PUK president of Iraq, Barham Saleh, also spoke strongly against it. It even raises questions under international law, because the state does have an obligation to prevent attacks from its territory onto the territory of another country.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Next up, we have a question from Arzu Yilmaz. Arzu, I'm going to unmute your mic here. So here we go.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you. Okay,
great. First, if possible, I want to ask two questions. The first question is to Henry Barkey. I mean, I totally agree with your judgment regarding Turkey-US relations, but what has happened in Iraq and Syria didn't take place in defiance of, in favor of Turkey, didn't take place in defiance of Turkey. So given the nature of transactional relations, which explains the current, relations between the US and Turkey, and considering the upcoming NATO summit. My question is, in case Turkey and US succeeds in solving this S-400s phenomenon question, then this decision to expand NATO mission in Iraq, could Turkey take a role, a significant role in this context, in future, in Iraq particularly? And I would like to remind that as of today, the number of Turkish troops is more than the number of US troops in Iraq. So just what I'm trying to say is this is not actually, despite all these conflicts between US and Turkey, things working in Iran, taking place in Iran, in Iraq, at least gives me an idea about possibilities in future. And within this context, could Turkey play a significant role in NATO's expanding mission in Iraq? And my question to Nilüfer Koç is, I mean, we have to, I think, underline a fact. Since 2017, the Kurds lost most of their achievements while the US named US-Kurdish relations as most reliable partnership in the Middle East. So given this, but at the same time, the US, maybe it's also a comment to what Ari said, yes, still Biden's policy is uncertain concerning the Middle East politics. However, maybe they don't want to make much change except this JCPOA, because when we look to their policy towards Kurds, still they repeatedly say that our relations with the Kurds is tactical, transactional, and temporary. So my question is, I don't want to, if you have time, I would really like to hear whether such a relation, to what extent helped the Kurdish interests in both Iraq and Syria. But more important than that, does such a relation, tactical, temporary, and transactional, trigger further risks for the Kurds in the Middle East? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arzu. I would just like to say to Nilüfer and Henry, before they answer the question, to just ask them to please keep the answers relatively brief. We're a little short on time. And then we'll have a final question for Hiwa, and then we'll wrap up. So Nilüfer and Henry, please.
Nilüfer, you go ahead.
Thank you. I think Arzu Yılmaz's question was about the referendum in 2017, so far I understand.
Since 2017, I said, the Kurds lost most of their achievements while the US named its relation with the Kurds as the most reliable partnership in the Middle East. So don't you think that this needs to be questioned? And given that such a tactical, transactional, and temporary relation would in time, in future, may cause some risks for the Kurds in such uncertainties in the region?
You see, from our perspective as Kurds, we don't have a problem to find compromises with the US. But the problem is that the US have difficulties to find compromises with us as Kurds, since, like the ambassador was saying, this policy is mostly focused on in relation from state to state. And since we don't have a state, we don't exist somehow as a non-state actor. We are not that important like Turkey, Iran, Iraq, Syria as states. And I think it's a challenge also for the US to see the new picture of the Kurds as well organized so far in defense, in politics, also in diplomacy, to recognize this or to see this. The Kurds became visible now in the Middle East. And this is a challenge also to the US policy. So because before the 90s, the Kurds were somehow internal problems of Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. But now Kurds are existing as a let's say, independent entity or a political actor in the region. So, and this is something new for the US, I guess. So, and I think the question has to be responded by Washington, D.C., not by myself. We are ready for compromises because we do believe politics is the issue. Politics is some kind of art, and you can find methods and opportunities to solve a problem. This is, from our side, there are no problems. But our existence as such is a new form in Middle East. And I think might be the US administration needs more time to understand the Kurds as a non-state actor, but powerful like a state. So this is one of the challenges, that's from my point. And the other thing, I think, well, there was opportunity, of course, it is the right of the Kurdish people to decide whether they want an independent state or autonomy or what kind of autonomy. It has to be decided by the Kurdish people. This is right. But we have to consider the political balances which are changing daily in Middle East. So in the time of referendum, I was in Bashur, Kurdistan. I was also in Rojava. I was traveling between both parts of Kurdistan. The discussions in the backstage of Kurdish politics was that we wish that Sheikh Masoud Barzani could ask the other Kurdish political parties for support. So not just the support of PUK, the parties in Iraqi Kurdistan, but also getting support from the Kurdish political parties in Iran, in Turkey, and also the PKK, because Kurdistan is interlinked. When something happens in one part of Kurdistan, is also affecting the other parts of Kurdistan. When one part is going to decide independence, it has to calculate the consequences for other parts of Kurdistan. So this was necessary, and I think, yeah, you are shaking your head, Ambassador, but you have been advisor to at that time there. I think you know the circumstances better, but I think it was not the time was not ready, and I think at that time, President Trump, U.S. President Trump was clearly saying we are not going to take this risk. Many letters have been sent by U.S. representatives to the Kurdish regional government in Iraq. So I was not against the decision of our people, whatever in Iraq and other parts, but we have to consider the regional components and the global one. So this is important when you're implementing any solution for the Kurdish question in Middle East. And the other point, which I'm really, as a Kurd, I'm getting upset when someone is saying what in Iraqi Kurdistan. So I'm a Kurdish. I can go to Rojava, to Bashur Kurdistan, to Iranian Kurdistan. Thousands of Bashuri Peshmerga spent years in Iranian Kurdistan, and also in this is solidarity amongst the people. So, and the one who's attacking the Kurdish territory is Turkey. No, it's not the PKK or any other party in this region. And PKK clearly said they are recognizing, respecting the status of southern Kurdistan as the Kurdistan regional government. There's no problem from that side. But saying so the Kurds has to decide in which part they can stay as Kurds. So I think this has to be respected.
Thank you so much, Nilüfer. Really briefly, if you could, Henry, you can answer Arzu's question,
look,
and then he will speak.
Arzu, I'm not sure that the relationship between Turkey and the United States will be easily resolved on June 14th. I mean, the S-400 crisis is very, very serious. There is no easy solution to it. But far more important is that the tension between Turkey and the United States has now deepened to such an extent that in Washington, with the exception of maybe one or two individuals, there is really no support for Turkey. Turkey has lost the Pentagon, has lost the State Department. So there is a great deal of mistrust of Turkey. So if you're talking about the NATO mission in Iraq, of course, the Turks naturally will want to be involved, and they will use it as an excuse even to deepen their relationship, their activities, if you want, in Iraq. But I suspect that NATO itself which is also very suspicious of Turkey now, is going to try to curtail and limit Turkish activities where such a thing would happen. I'm not sure it will happen, by the way, so we'll see.
Thank you very much, Henry. And final question is for Hiwa here. We are wondering if you could briefly tell us about what happened during your interview on TRT Arabic.
Yeah, I was called for their main bulletin, 8 o'clock, 8 p.m., to be the third lead guest. And TRT Arabic, of course, is the state TV. They said, could you tell us more about the PKK terrorist attack on the Peshmerga in the region of northern Iraq? And before I answer, I tried to correct the two terms. I said, the place I'm talking to you from is called Iraqi Kurdistan. This is a legal and constitutional term. And he interrupted me by saying, this is our editorial policy. We cannot call the place Kurdistan. And the other issue was, I said, no Kurd considers the PKK as a terrorist organization. The only place that considers PKK as a terrorist organization is the Turkish government and Turkish state. And then they cut the program. What was interesting, they cut me off, basically. They took me off air. What was interesting was the reaction from all parts of Kurdistan about these two issues. They were on social media, of course. And it was very interesting to see how united the Kurds are and how divisive the Kurdish parties are. Thank you.
Well, I guess what can you expect when you're speaking on TRT? Okay, well, with that, I'm going to wrap up here. I would like to thank Nilofer, Henry, Peter, and Hiwa so much for joining us today, and thank you for Sirwan for hosting this.
Thank you.
And especially thank you to everyone who is in attendance, wherever you are. I hope that you're safe and healthy, and we look forward to joining you next time at the Washington Kurdish Institute. Have a great day or evening. Farewell.
Like